Hello, friends. Wonderful greetings of the day to all of you. So, I, Kunal Nagpal, heartfully welcome you all to today's session. And before beginning our session, I would like to extend warm greetings of this auspicious festival, Diwali. Happy Diwali. So, my dear friends, on this extremely pious day, let's have a deep discussion, a deep discussion into the economic situation of India. Dear friends, all of us are quite aware that amidst this extremely volatile, challenging, uncertain, and intensifying global scenario, India's picture is actually being highlighted worldwide. The way our strategic leaders are actually formulating and implementing the long-term strategies with a stable, perseverant mindset and also along with a far-sighted visionary approach. This is really extraordinary for the developing economy like India. So we should actually be very proud of this particular aspect. So my dear friends, our leading economists, that is Mr. Arudeep Nandi, who is the leading economist for India from Nomura organization, and Mrs. Sonal Verma, who is the chief economist India and Asia ex Japan, have basically presented their views on the Indian economy, and they have also tried to analyze what all factors might basically prohibit or hamper India's ongoing pace or ongoing momentum to actually tackle these tough global times. What are those hindering factors which will affect which are basically projected to affect India's recovery in the upcoming times? Despite the strong foundations, we are going to have a deep overview on this particular aspect. So, my dear friends, with a mix of tighter US Fed policy, a cost of living crisis, geopolitical uncertainties, weak global demand, and balance of payment pressures clouding the economic outlook, the global and Indian economies are basically at the crossroads. So, what lies ahead for India? The global turbulence is basically likely to increase in amplitude. US inflation remains uncomfortably high, which may actually necessitate the Fed funds rate rising to 5.25 to 5.5% by March 2023. This is likely to push the United States economy into a recession, with the gross domestic product contracting by 1.1% year on year in 2023. So, beset by rising cost of living, the euro area is likely to contract by 1.6% next year. China offers little counterbalance, which is actually impeded by COVID restrictions and a weakened property sector. So, export slowdown, inventory destocking, and tighter financial conditions are the basic overhangs on the rest of Asia. Meanwhile, the geopolitical risks abound, and as weak growth combines with the tightening liquidity and higher rates, the financial stability risks cannot be ruled out. Therefore, in this global backdrop, India appears in a relatively stronger position. Its economic foundations are much stronger today than 5 to 10 years ago. India did not roll out the developed economies style fiscal and monetary policy easing during the pandemic, which should benefit from a macro standpoint. The balance sheets are also much stronger now with the overall deleveraging by the corporate sector and a stronger banking balance sheet with low NPA loans, that is the non-performing loans. Over the medium term, the economy should also benefit from some new growth drivers such as digitization, supply chain shifts, and green and infrastructure spending. Now, these are the basic highlights. More additional factors which may help the Indian economy to prosper and also to deal effectively in this uncertain global economic situation. That is digitization, supply chain shifts, and green and infrastructure spending. So these are certain areas where we can actually gain a lot if we capitalize on these core areas. The greater push towards the overall digitization process may also unlock the productivity gains. So despite these strengths, India can hardly remain unaffected. Now, what are certain roadblocks which would still hamper India's progress or India's ongoing momentum to deal in this tough global time? What are those roadblocks? Let's have a discussion into this particular aspect. The contraction in August industrial production growth basically demonstrates that the overall sheen is starting to fade. I repeat, the contraction in August industrial production growth basically demonstrates that the sheen is starting to fade. Investment and consumption indicators in August to September have moderated from their peak in Q2 of 2022, suggesting weaker sequential momentum into Q3, that is July to September. Even the services sector, which was close to 20 percentage points above the pre-pandemic level during the Q2, has now moderated to about 8 percentage points, suggesting the post-pandemic reopening tailwinds are slowly ebbing. Now, my dear friends, we basically need to introspect and ask ourselves, what are the basic traits which are helping not only to tackle or survive in these ongoing challenging global times, but also we are able to help other countries as well to deal with the crisis in their respective economies in these tough global times. So what are those basic traits? My dear friends, that basic trait is the continuous incorporation of the Kaizen principles, or that is of continuous improvement. That is the core element of innovation needs to be incorporated in our overall decision making process at the strategic level with a far-sighted visionary approach. That's the basic trait of a true dynamic leader, right? And that's what we should actually be proud of. So now, in this context, let's welcome a new terminology, that is the K word. Now, what is this K word? Let's discuss. The full impact of the global slowdown on the domestic outlook is also yet to materialize. The past global slowdowns have typically impacted India with a lag of around 2 quarters. Weak global demand hits not just exports but also the overall manufacturing and investment related sectors. With still sluggish private capital expenditure, weak exports, and the tightening financial conditions, the growth driver in the coming year will be highly K-shaped consumer and government spending. I repeat, with still sluggish private capital expenditure, weak exports, and the overall tightening financial conditions, the growth driver in the coming year will be highly K-shaped consumer and government spending. The GDP growth should average 7% in the financial year 2023, but then actually moderate to 5.2% in the financial year 2024, below the consensus expectations of 6 to 6.5%. Even for the government of India, the overall arithmetic does not get easier, and the basic carrot of slipping on fiscal commitments to support growth comes with the stick of disrupting macroeconomic stability. Higher nominal gross domestic product growth so far, upheld by the elevated inflation, has led to an overall tax bonanza, buying valuable fiscal space to actually accommodate extra spending on food and fertilizer subsidies, excise duty cuts, and other revenue shortfalls. However, with growth and inflation expected to moderate in the financial year 2024, this cushion is likely to be short-lived. So, if the government of India continues with its stated ambition of higher capital expenditure, it will very likely compromise on the revenue expenditure or on the fiscal consolidation goal. Now, talking on the external sector forefront, the overall moderation in the export growth amid seemingly sticky imports basically appears poised to balloon the current account deficit to 3.8% of the gross domestic product in the financial year 2023 from 1.2% in the financial year 2022. While the Reserve Bank of India (RBI) has run down its forex reserves, so a less appreciated aspect is that if achieved, the twin aims of countering currency volatility as well as simultaneously tightening the domestic liquidity, that is selling dollars, means draining rupees out of the system, therefore bringing it more in sync with the monetary policy stance. This is a very important highlight, hence I repeat it. On the external sector, the overall moderation in the export growth amid seemingly sticky imports appears poised to balloon the current account deficit to 3.8% of the gross domestic product in the financial year 2023 from 1.2% in the financial year 2022. While the Reserve Bank of India has run down its forex reserves, a less appreciated aspect is that it achieved the twin aims of countering the currency volatility as well as simultaneously tightening the domestic liquidity, that is selling dollars, means draining rupees out of the system, hence bringing it more in sync with the monetary policy stance. The forex reserves remain adequate and can be used to smoothen the volatility, but defending any particular currency level would be self-defeating. Rather, the rupee should be allowed to actually gradually adjust, considering a weak currency which works as a shock absorber and could help moderate the current account deficit over time. The Reserve Bank of India has its work cut out on inflation, The financial year 2023 consumer price index, that is CPI inflation, is tracking about 6.8% year on year, nearly 1 percentage point higher than the RBI's upper tolerance level. So the upside risks include higher food inflation, relentlessly high core inflation, and potential second round effects. This is despite global commodity prices moderating, suggesting that firms are actually recouping their margins rather than passing on the benefit to the consumers. So, my dear friends, these times existing in the global economy are quite sensitive, and if we talk about the coming years or the coming months, the times are actually expected to be more challenging, more tough. So it's actually a falling tide is dropping all the boats. So I know this statement is actually not so. It is not encouraging, but we need to basically think over it. We need to ponder over it in order to prevent our economy from the major crisis, right? So what are the core areas of strength which we need to focus on so that our pace of tackling with these tough times remains stable, our overall momentum remains unaffected? We need to be more and more proactive in our overall decision making process at the strategic level. So, my dear friends, with inflationary concerns still live and growth somewhat resilient, for now, economic conditions basically appear broadly in favor of more rate hikes. However, we don't expect the rate hikes for currency defense. Instead, currency weakness is likely to be tackled through forex intervention and the macroprudential tools. More policy rate hikes are likely, but driven by the domestic considerations, and the terminal repo rate that is around 6.5% should not be too far away. Therefore, on the whole, despite the stronger foundations, India's post-pandemic recovery will likely be cut short by the incoming global growth slowdown. In a global village, there is no decoupling, and the downside risks are actually plenty. If 2023 was a car ride, the advice is not just to strap on the seatbelts, but to borrow a helmet too. So this last line is actually quite thought-provoking, which is emphasizing on the need, or which is basically emphasizing on the basic need of the hour, right, which we need to incorporate in our policy making process. Hence, we need to be more dynamic in our overall leadership pattern, in our overall policy making processes. And as we know, our leaders are extremely dedicated towards this particular aspect, and we should basically support our leaders and encourage our leaders by just one effort, that is, we should have full faith and trust in them. If we see our progress in the last years, we have been able to sustain those crises. Along with that, we have been also able to help other economies around us, be it in the COVID times. We not only guaranteed or assured 90% vaccination in our own country, whether it is the rural area or the urban area, we also were able to supply the vaccines to the needy countries, right? And consider the fact we are the developing country, right? Also, my dear friends, recently in this ongoing global upheaval, when Sri Lanka was facing major crisis, we helped it to basically stand once again. And the ongoing food and energy crisis, as food and energy are the major sectors which have been affected worldwide due to the ongoing geopolitical imbalances, the ongoing and actually intensifying Ukraine-Russia situation. We have been able to help the needy countries to basically meet their basic necessities. Basic necessities. So, in order to make this momentum, in order to keep this momentum stable, we need to be more and more dynamic. We need to be more and more proactive, and as the times going and as the times in the near future appear to be challenging for the entire global economy, we need to basically tighten our seat belts, and also we need to put on our helmets too. That is, we need to incorporate more and more innovation and more perseverance in our overall efforts to deal with this situation. So, my dear friends, we are basically going to have a discussion why India's GDP growth rate, though it is though the Indian economy is actually at a slipping at a slipping state, but still it actually aspires to still canter on. So even if the international organizations, that is the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank are projecting the weak GDP growth rate for India in the coming years, or in the coming session, but still our Reserve Bank of India is still quite optimistic and is able to see a ray of hope. Mr. Srinivas V. Dempo, who is the president of All India Management Association, AIMA, is actually quite optimistic in this particular aspect. So let's see what he has to say, or what basic insights he has in this regard. The global supply and inflation shocks have dragged down India's GDP growth forecasts over the past 3 months. So basically, dear friends, we are basically seeing that how our leading economists are still able to see a ray of hope for the Indian economy, though it is a developing economy. And this is only possible because we are putting our major focus, our overall emphasis on the core areas of strength, which we need to capitalize on in order to deal with this tough time. And though World Bank and International Monetary Fund have projected the weaker GDP growth rate for the upcoming session, but still our Reserve Bank of India is still quite optimistic in this particular aspect. So the International Monetary Fund has cut its growth forecast for India's GDP this year to 6.8% from 7.4%. The World Bank has snipped it to 6.5% from 7.5%. These are actually the basic dramatic cuts in a very short period. However, the Reserve Bank of India has adjusted its 2022-23 growth estimate only mildly to 7% from 7.2%, showing confidence in India's ability to absorb the global economic and geopolitical shocks. This basically requires a lot of courage to put this statement, right? To actually counter the views or to counter the projections made by the leading global organizations. This requires a lot of confidence, a lot of courage in our core areas of strength. We need to be very confident that we will capitalize at our fullest capacity. So, even as IMF and World Bank have lowered India's GDP growth forecasts, they have acknowledged India's strength. The World Bank has stated that India is actually not as vulnerable to the global economic downturn as other regional economies. The International Monetary Fund has pointed out that India is set to become the world's third largest economy by 2028, having a GDP of about $5.36 trillion, overtaking Japan. So the projections estimate that India will basically be able to catch up with Germany by 2026. Last quarter, India overtook Britain, who was economically in a bad state, to be fair, to claim the fifth spot in the world's largest economies. This is actually a fact to be very proud of. Still, India cannot dodge the global rough weather. It actually needs to mitigate the fallout of the global slowdown without trading its long-term growth capacity for the short-term pain mitigation. India's biggest challenge now is to bring down inflation even at the cost of same growth so that it can keep growing at a higher rate for many years. Though its current growth rate would ensure it is not trapped in the high inflation or low growth spiral, it still needs to keep its economic fundamentals in good shape. And the basic key is to prevent inflation expectations from going out of hand and creating a vicious price wage hike spiral. Also, once inflation infects the broader economy and affects the daily living, it creates the political issues that can affect the policy making. The RBI has not basically panicked despite the consumer inflation remaining above its target of 4% for nearly 3 years and above its upper tolerance limit of 6% for nearly a year. It has remained biased towards growth, but now it must respond to the energy and food price volatility and the overall monetary tightening in the key economies and the rupee's erosion against the dollar. Dear friends, these are the basic issues which require urgent addressal by the Indian economy. I repeat, energy and food price volatility. Next is the monetary tightening in the key economies, and the third major issue is rupee's erosion against the dollar. The Reserve Bank of India has shown willingness to switch tracks and chase the price stability instead of growth alone, and do whatever it takes to pin down inflation first. Dear friends, basically the overall mechanism for setting the priorities changes with time, right? So the need of the hour is to basically is to basically address the main areas of concern so that our economy's overall functioning remains intact, remains stable, right? So over the past 6 months, it has raised its interest rate by nearly 2% and has communicated its basic preparedness to go further if need be. RBI has also done its utmost to prevent a runaway dollar from making India's imports even more expensive and push up India's dollar debt burden. So while India has done the overall has done the overall calibration for its monetary policy to mitigate the impact of the monetary actions of the United States, it has been outstanding in its fiscal response to the inflation crisis. India has used targeted fiscal measures rather than inflation-inducing broad spending to cushion the impact of inflation on the population. Both International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have singled out India as a model for inflation relief through digital bank accounts. India's response to food inflation is also appreciated, although with the overall caveat that its ban on food exports will hurt the global stability and growth. Even though India's fiscal deficit has hit double digits, it has used a mix of targeted subsidies and the overall taxation policies to sustain growth momentum without losing control of its budgets. It continues to keep its debt at the manageable levels despite high welfare spending and depreciating currency. The International Monetary Fund estimates that India will end up with its debt amounting to 84% of its gross domestic product, which is actually manageable within the India's horizon of the strong growth prospects and the overall situation of reserves. Though the external conditions are actually rough at the moment, but India is relatively well placed to keep growing at a fast rate. So, if India can sustain a growth rate of 6 to 7% in the worst case scenario, it would pull in much more global growth in the coming years. Dear friends, what factors are still insisting us or convincing us to believe in our areas of strength, to believe in the fact that there is still hope for India being a developing economy? What factors are basically encouraging the Reserve Bank of India to have confidence on, even to counter the projections made by the leading international organizations, IMF and World Bank, for the overall growth prospects for the Indian economy? What all factors are basically insisting or convincing the leading economists of India to basically have trust on? Dear friends, it is our ability to basically never give up. It is our basic trait of the trust factor we have on our core areas of strength, that if we capitalize on them, we can really prosper. And that's what we are doing, and that's what the overall statistics is showing, and that's what the other countries of the globe are actually appreciating about our economy. So we really need to be dynamic, flexible, far-sighted, visionary, strategic thinker. Yes, this is the prerequisite. But along with that it's very important to conduct the SWOT analysis on a regular basis, and that's what we are doing, which is actually helping us to capitalize on our core areas of strength, to not only help ourselves to sustain in the tough times, but also to help our friends across the globe to deal with this situation in a humanitarian manner, right? And this is the basic sense of belongingness. If we are standing unaffected in this global storm or global upheaval, then only our stability can help other countries to basically aid their economies come out of the tough time, right? Our basic confidence to deal with this situation is convincing them to have trust in India and approach India as the helping hand. And this is our basic speciality we need to be proud of, and this is the essence of the true dynamic leadership. This is the basic speciality of a true leader who never gives up. And this is the trait we need to keep continuing in our and this is the basic trait we need to keep we need to keep on incorporating in our overall strategic framework of the decision making process at both macro and micro levels. So on this note, I would like to end today's session, right? So my dear friends, I hope you have been benefited immensely with this productive session. Namaste.